The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
I'm joined today by chris-lebron, political philosopher and writer, PhD and academic from MIT, author of The Making of Black Lives Matter, A Brief History of an Idea. He's also the author of a piece in Boston Review, Black Panther, It's Not the Movie We Deserve. Christopher LeBron, thanks so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Ben. I appreciate it.
It's definitely my pleasure. I'm always honored to have super smart Black people on my show anytime I get the opportunity. And reading your piece, and not just your pedigree, but just reading your work. I know you're a top tier intellectual, and I just happen to disagree with your article. And actually, I think what's happening with you and I is, I guess it's kind of a microcosm of what's happening around the country with regard to Black Panther. So there's a lot of places that we can start, but let's start by just tell my audience a little bit about yourself briefly, and then tell us about your overall experience, what made you want to write this article.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, Ben. So I'm the kind of uncommon, for whatever these terms are worth, social commentator, social critic. I'm a trained academic in the field of political theory and political philosophy, but the work I do focuses on race, racial inequality, democratic ethics. And what I've been trying to do over the past few years is move into what we on the professional side of philosophy call public philosophy. I'm one of the people that thinks philosophy is only useful unless we're talking. And I think it should be for everybody, because we all need to be thinking critically and clearly about our social condition and how all of us can have a good life, not just Black folks, but all of us.
Right.
But because we live in a society still marked by institutional racism and institutional inequality, I focus my efforts on Black folks, which leads to how I got to this piece. Past few years is when I moved into doing more public philosophy, writing for the New York Times and other pieces for Boston Review. And I'm always interested in how Blackness, brownness is represented in our media. And, as with all things, this is a movie that could never was going to bear the weight that it was given. It couldn't satisfy everybody. So that's a given. That's okay.
Right.
But maybe this is a disagreement you and I have, and me and other folks have, is that, but there's a line. And so I came to writing about the piece because I went into it thinking one kind of movie was going to be presented, and me being a little bit jaded about it, but then it became something else. And I was on my, the car ride back with a good friend of mine, also an academic historian. And that 1 hour car ride back from DC back to Baltimore, that was a heavy car ride. I'm surprised my car didn't run out of gas. That conversation was so heavy. And so I wanted to share the view of the people because, going into the movie, the media was was just breathless over the anticipation, then the early reviews and such. And, I have, a very kind of basic view. White liberal folks, a lot of them see things correctly, and they're on the right side and genuinely on the right side. But then there's a big patch of those folks who want to feel they're on the right side, and media seems to me to always to grasp very quickly any Black art that will let them point to that and give them their cred.
Right.
And Black Panther seemed to me be that movie that if they could all just kind of breathlessly fall over themselves at how revolutionary and how Black the movie was, this would get the job done. But I think there's room there for real legitimate criticism. So yeah, that's how you got the piece.
Absolutely. So, and I always want to start with caveats, like my audience doesn't know me, but sometimes there's new people who listening in and they don't may not understand my perspective. I think I generally see the world through a very similar lens that you do. Definitely with the perspective of white liberals, I take more of the Malcolm approach. It's the fact that they are the fox versus the wolf, and it's the fox that ends up with the lamb chop on its plate, lamb chop representing the Black community. So I do see the problems of white liberalism interfering with Black liberation in general. But I think where we part ways on this movie is that I honestly do not believe that Coogler and the other gentleman who wrote with him, Cole, I believe is his last name. I don't believe that they were trying to make Killmonger be a representative of black radicalism or black liberation. I think they attempted to make him a caricature of himself, to be quite honest with you. He was an ambitious person with a lot of hurt and anger that used the language of black liberation that would resonate with everyone. But at the end of the day, I don't think he was a representative of liberation. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people have made this point, and I think two things. The first thing I think is, if they didn't intend him to stand for any of these things, then the movie is irresponsible for its first outing, kind of making black folks fight amongst each other when there's a language of racism in the movie. That just seems to me to be irresponsible on a meta level. But when you think about the lip service paid in the movie to the idea that, this is a young black boy raised in inner city America whose father has seen firsthand the evils of American racism and wants to be a revolutionary and help black folks. And this is kind of the childhood tradition he's raised up in. And his initial stance in the movie, and when he's presented to T'Challa in the throne room as criticizing him for the 2 billion people not being helped around the world, it's just kind of hard to ignore that. And one more thing I want to say just in this point, when we're going to talk more about it, but I tried to really watch this movie from a person who isn't me, by which I mean I'm trained, and folks like you were trained to look at these things and read into them deeply. And maybe in that sense, give a lot of leeway to somebody like Killmonger. But I try to watch from the perspective of somebody who doesn't think about these things on a regular basis. And so when I think from that perspective, and Killmonger says it's about liberation, that person is going to take that as meaning something, right? And so that's going to linger with that person through the movie. And so everything that happens later in the movie, that baggage is going to come with it. So then we want to know what happens to that baggage, what happens to that idea as Killmonger develops as a character. So,
I think that was the best critique of my critique was that my perspective was, while they agreed with it and they felt it was nuanced and all those good things, they felt like the average moviegoer would not have seen that. And the impact of what they saw at face value should be an issue of concern as well. And I agree with that. I think that's a extremely valid critique. But then I also feel like that's the role of, if you want to call it, public intellectuals to step in and offer an interpretation. I want to read a line from your piece. You were speaking of N'Jobu betraying the people of Wakanda in his exchange with T'Chaka. N'Jobu threatens an aide of T'Chaka, who then kills N'Jobu, and the murder leaves Killmonger orphaned. However, this is the part right here. However, Killmonger has learned of Wakanda from his father. Living in poverty in Oakland, he grows to become a deadly soldier to make good on his father's radical aim to use Wakanda's power to liberate black people everywhere by force if necessary. I argue that he had an entirely different vision than his father. I don't feel it was a continuation of his father. If there's anybody in the movie that I identify with the most, it was Killmonger's father, because he was frustrated. He saw the despair and he saw the opportunity to help. I honestly see Wakanda as both heroic and villainous, but I identify most with his father. And the reason I say that his mission was different than his father's was because in his version of the ancestral plane, he essentially rejected his father, and he rejected his father's love, and he took his own path that went beyond what his father was trying to do. His father, who would use violence if necessary, which, I mean, I would argue on any day of the week, sometimes violence is necessary. But I think there's a unique difference between using violence when it's necessary to throw off the chains of your oppressors, and then using violence from a position of power to create black domination. I think Killmonger wanted to dominate the world, not liberate black people.
Now, this is, and I thank you for that, because this is really, in some sense, the real core of the argument. So there's actually a lot in there that I agree with. So let me see if I could kind of take this in a couple of steps. You're right. He rejects his father, right? In a sense. I think where some of what I think is muddying up things for people on our side trying to get clear on this is that and this is me doing the work of that philosophers do, there's a distinction between goals and motivations.
Mm-hmm.
I think it remains a goal throughout that Killmonger wants to, in some sense, overcome white power structures. I think what motivates him, at least how the movie presents him, what motivates him initially is this rage at being abandoned by Wakanda and what he feels Black people everywhere have to be subjected to because Wakanda won't get involved.
Right.
But what's interesting is that once he gets to Wakanda, that's when his motivations seem to shift. He sees the wonders firsthand. He sees the technology, the weapons. The same, but it seems the motivation now is to be on top of that heap, which is why I call him a receptacle of inner city gangsterism, which to me was kind of lazy because what seems to really happen in my eyes is that he's a G gone global. Right, that he basically he's engaged when he gets to Wakanda. He's talking click talk, burn it all. The sun's never gonna set in my empire. It's like he wants to have like the whole block. It's like what you see in The Wire, right? And all of a sudden, he still wants to overthrow those powers, and he never actually says, "I'm gonna rule. I'm gonna oppress Black people." He wants to rule over them, but in their name. I'm not saying that justifies it. What I am saying is the goal seems to have been consistent. The motivation, though, shifts from liberation out of rage to liberation. Hey, I could be king, and I could rule over an empire that's global. Yeah. And I think there's a reason why it gets muddied. If I could just say one more thing.
Yeah, help yourself.
One of the things that's interesting online, people have in response to somebody like myself have been citing Barry Jenkins' interview, and they asked Barry Jenkins, is it okay that there are no white people in this movie with the CIA agent bracketed? And his response was, of course it is. Black imagination, Black narratives often leave out white people. But this is what's a little bit dishonest about his response. And I love Barry Jenkins. I wish he would get a hero movie. I think he'd do it perfectly. But what's dishonest about his response, look at Moonlight. There are no white people in the movie except for like the club scene, but there are white people in the movie. Where are they? They're in the privileged structures of gentrification. These are what the two Black hipsters are working against. They're in the structures of white privilege and inequality. You look at Moonlight, they're in the school system, which is what makes that scene with the Black kids being joyful so powerful, because they're doing it in the face of this structure that they don't control. So in his movies, there are white people, but they're in the structures that tend to marginalize Black folks. But you think about Black Panther, Clow is basically just a free-floating crazy dude. And then you have the CIA agent who is embedded in a structure, but he's benevolent. So now the structure that Killmonger is really responding to is invisible in the movie. So there's really no way to get a real bead on what he's responding to other than to see his physical imposition as a manifestation of the rage that now just seems to be, hey, I'm gonna run this. And that's just to my mind unfortunate and a bit sloppy.
And I heard that critique. I think the next day, like Friday night, Saturday morning, the first critique was the benevolence, the role of the CIA agent, or more specifically, the lack of structured stimulus that is motivating Killmonger. Like, where was the institutional racism? Where was the white supremacy? It wasn't really represented in there in so much as you just had the Claw, his role, and the CIA was benevolent. But here's the thing. I think it's in us. I think that Coogler was writing from a position, and Cole, they were writing from positions where the expectation that the audience that's coming already has it in us. Like, we already know the structures. We already feel it. That's why that's why Killmonger was so relatable instantly with his very first line about British ancestors stealing everything that they had. Instantly, every Black person with any knowledge of white supremacy and colonialism instantly knew an entire backlog of not only information, but also feelings, a visceral response to that truth that he spoke. And while there was no, maybe after Claw was off the scene, there was no representation of that white supremacy, it was like in every single member of the audience. I mean, it's like, we don't have to see white supremacy on the screen because I honestly lived it the few minutes before I walked into the movie theater. So maybe that's giving too much to the author. But I also think that, sometimes the writers, they have to write based on the expectation of where their audience is coming from.
That's a really good point also. But there's one thing about that troubles me just a little bit. So on the one hand, I think there's a slice of the viewership for whom you're right. Like we're going to come in there with that idea, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's a whole other slice of viewership, both white and black folks, who are not going to come in there, and not because they're stupid or dumb or some such. It's how normalized black inequality has become that to see it represented on a screen, almost you're just kind of numb to it. And I think Coogler can't take that for granted.
Yeah.
But then there's this third viewership. And I think this, I don't have numbers on this. I'm just my instinct, intuition. I'm putting it out there as a hypothesis. Sure. But I was speaking to, a quote unquote, very educated black man the other day about the movie. And he said the funniest thing to me. He said, I'm like 45 minutes into the movie. And then he was like, about 45 minutes in, I said to myself out loud in the theater, I'm being seduced.
That's good. That's good.
And the thing is, it's hard not to be, right? Chadwick, look, much love to the whole cast, but Chadwick is a fantastic, powerful screen presence. He's just badass as Panther. And you knew that was going to be the case from Civil War when he faces off against the Winter Soldier with no suit. You're like, this dude is going to run things the next movie. You know what? I love that imagery. You have Lupita. You have Lupita as Nakia just being the strong, ethical, and physical force as she is. Shuri, etc. The whole cast, right? And there's a way in which then Wakanda's beautiful, and the technology makes Tony Stark look primitive, right?
Right.
And you start to think, I am being seduced. I'm meant to go in for this image, and I use this language with another conversation: magical Negroes.
That's good. That's good.
And so then you start thinking, like, what's Coogler really up to here? And look, I don't want to be like hard on the guy, because look, he's working for a big studio and they've got their goals, right? So I get all of that, and there's, like I said, there's no way he's going to solve the world's problems.
Right.
But I think there are lines, and so when you disconnect the explicit, clear connection to white privilege as Jenkins does in his movies, and then you do all this whiz bang stuff and you're presenting what appears to be all these magical black people, then all of a sudden the consciousness of background racism fades farther and farther back. And then what begins to creep to the forward is this CIA agent who's going to help fight the bad black people. Then all of a sudden you're really wondering what kind of cognitive dissonance is being presented here. And I think in this respect, I hate to say it, because the brother made a movie that's going to make history,
right,
but it's a little bit irresponsible.
This is where I think we see this movie the most differently. I don't think that this is ultimately a story of a struggle between blackness and white supremacy or even colonialism. I think it's a struggle within the black community in terms of what responsibility do we have to each other. I don't see Wakanda's noble elites as heroes. I see them as the problem. And I think if I were to speak on behalf of or to try to speak on behalf of Coogler, I think he was trying to show us that the struggle, here's a good proxy. The ongoing and unanswered question between Ta-Nehisi Coates and Cornel West of black neoliberalism and the black radical tradition. I think that's what we saw on the screen, because to me, the Wakandans represented black neoliberalism, and even in his solution at the end, which was my least favorite part of the movie, the part that actually made me mad, is like, dude, we don't want, I don't want black domination, and I don't want black supremacy to replace white supremacy where we're dominating the world. But dude, you're going to have to do better than some outreach centers. Miss me with that. Like, that's some tired cliche. That's some stuff that white folks try to do when they feel guilty about all the wealth that they have and all the poverty that's in the black community. And I think that that's the ultimate, the reason I feel like that's the main point of the movie is because that's literally the true divide between T'Challa and his father, T'Chaka, and between Killmonger, is what responsibility do black folks have to each other? The black elite, the talented 10th. Are we going with that motif? Is that? And I think Coogler answered that, and he didn't finish answering it. Now, my colleagues here, they argue with me down. They're like, Coogler's not finished with that story. Coogler stopped it at the cliche of neoliberal education solutions, this outreach center, but he's going to go go further in the next story. But the entire movie to me ultimately was about Black radical tradition versus in terms of what responsibility do we have. And the only way I contradict my own self is that I don't feel that there was actually a true representation of the Black radical tradition, especially not in Killmonger. Killmonger was a sociopath.
Yeah, no, there. So there, I think that's really spot on, man. And what's the good brother Eddie Glaude.
Great brother, love him. He's been on the show. Yeah.
He had said, one of the things he was disturbed by was, the Black radical tradition being represented with such anger and bitterness. When the Black radical tradition also includes somebody like Audre Lorde, right? She's not trying to raise a weapon at all, right? She's trying to do it through the idea of love and being have the widest possible identity that one can have, because we are authors of ourselves, right? That could be radical too. So I agree with you. There wasn't really a proper radical tradition, but again, right? Me and you and other folks like us, we can parse this out. But what the audience is meant to see is the good Black guy versus the bad Black guy. Kugler was trying to present that debate, I think, again, kind of presenting Killmonger as this kind of like this rage-induced inner city dude who's going to basically take, click management, to gone international. I just think it's hard to.
That's great.
I think it's hard to kind of take seriously that he wanted to present these competing traditions of Black thought, which I could have been in for, with the caveat, I still think it would have been cool for the first Black Panther movie, just straight out have a white villain if we're going to be speaking about racism at all. But, let's go with that. You have a lot of markers in the movie that kind of question the sincerity of that divide, right? Look, this may seem like a small thing, but as I was very irritated with the movie, by the end of it, here's a final scene. He's gonna buy some buildings, and you ever see that Spike Lee movie where not that Spike, you ever seen Do the Right Thing, that scene where the guy goes, I was born in Brooklyn, and the white guy goes, I was born here too, and everybody's like, oh, it just busts up the whole vision, right? Yeah. And so here he's gonna buy these buildings, fine, and then they bring the spaceship out the sky, and what's one of the first things these little brown kids say? You think I could take it apart and sell it?
Oh yeah.
That's your question, man. You think a little kid sees something flying from the sky, and you think their first thought is, can I sell it? The first thing they want to think is, how can I fly this? How powerful would that have been?
Brother, I think you got me in check. You don't have me in checkmate yet, but that's a hell of a point. That is good. And that is disturbing from that perspective. That whole scene, I think we can agree that entire scene could just be burned. Like, let's just take that entire scene and throw it away, because it is a mountain of nothingness, in the sense that it provides, we've got enough centers, man. I can go, I'm in Atlanta, you're in Baltimore. How many centers can we pass by before we even get to our offices? I would agree that scene, but I still will hold firm that this was more about, because here's the reality though, Chris. The reality of it is that we do have a Black elite. We do have Black nobility, and they do carry, in some regards, they do carry a sense of separatism, of isolationism, of looking down on everyone else and not lifting a finger to help anyone else. And if they do lift a finger, they're going to build an outreach center. That is a prevailing problem in the Black community that we really haven't answered. Like, to what extent are we our brother's keeper once we've gone and become Wakandan?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. Now imagine that last scene where, he buys some buildings, but he kind of echoed, right? This, a lot of people have been getting at me saying, there's significance. It takes place in Oakland where the Panthers were. Well, if he buys those buildings, like, we're going to set up checkpoints, and we're going to have a community where we take care of ourselves and start pushing that outward so that Black folks can be safe.
Man, right? you got me back in check. That's such a good point.
It's not even about that, because me and you are vibing off the same thing.
You're almost bringing me with that one point. You're almost bringing me to your side of the argument. It'd be a shame if I have to go back and write another article to attack myself.
But and that's and this is the thing. This is why Again, I hate to get at the brother, because to make a movie like this is a huge thing. But if we're gonna go in for that kind of intellectual work, then we gotta do it in better faith than this.
Well, I am. What's that scripture? I haven't been in church in a while, but I'm almost persuaded. To see it from your lens, particularly because of the last scene. I did forget about what the little boy said. I heard it, but it went right past my ears. But that's such a significant statement that it almost does betray the entire movie. It plays into some very, very tired cliches of Black Americans.
This conversation, one of the things that's been so powerful is there's people, online, talking about the movie, not people not trained like, you and I who don't do this for a living to kind of sit and just kind of put our fingers to our forehead and think it out, right? These are folks who, they're doing everyday things and stuff. And this movie is really evoking from quote unquote average viewers a deep disposition to really think through the Black situation from the point of view of this representation. And and these folks, they're saying brilliant things for and against the movie.
Yeah.
Look, one thing we have to give, I want to give to Coogler and the whole team is that they produced a cultural artifact that's resonating with the people, and the people are thinking about it beyond the seduction.
Yeah.
And if you think about it beyond the seduction, then maybe that's the best we can hope for the movie.
Here's my last Hail Mary, and it's not really a Hail Mary. I'm glad you brought that up. The seduction. I would argue that what people walked away with more than anything else actually contradicts the idea that it was seductive.
Okay,
and it's when people left, you know what the number one thing I think I've heard from everyone: leave us alone, colonizer. Hush, colonizer. It's more of a disposition towards whiteness in general that we didn't even have to fight white supremacy in the movie. When we left, the majority of Black America is like white. If white people start speaking out of turn, we need to start barking at them. Woof, woof, woof. There's an empowerment that came from the movie on a level, on a very simplistic level that doesn't have to be nuanced. That may not be intellectual, but it's just a feeling that Black people came out of that not looking at the Black radical tradition any differently, right? And I think this is the magic of the movie, is that we didn't just see ourselves as the Black American from Oakland. We saw ourselves as the Wakandans. And, ironically, we're not, right? We were the abandoned children of Wakanda, but still he gave us the opportunity to see ourselves both as the Black Americans, but as Africans, right? He kind of gave us an opportunity to cross that divide between children of the diaspora and people who are from Africa now. And we all left that movie with, you better know your place, colonizer. Hush, So that would be the way, if we take away all the intellectual critiques of it, what did most people leave with? It wasn't a downward gaze towards Black radicalism at all. It was, woo, why are you talking? That kind of thing.
That's not Hail Mary at all. That's a powerful and true point. And you are seeing it online. Like, there's a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
Over this experience.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the sense of ownership is being expressed, at least when I've seen online. Maybe there's some, it's out there, but what I've seen online is a sense of ownership that actually does not need to expressly tell other people to hush, right? This is our thing. And then in response, I've seen so many, white folks responding saying, this is not my area to speak, or, I don't know enough about this, and that's not something you see a lot.
That's an accomplishment in and of itself, brother.
It's not something you see a lot. And, and like I said, it's a cultural artifact, and you and I could agree perfectly well on this point that this has become our thing.
Absolutely.
To discuss. And not at the exclusion of other folks, because it's important that we all talk about this, but we've seen this as our thing. I mean, look what me and you are doing right now.
Absolutely.
Me and Adam Serwer at the Atlantic.
Yeah.
We're trying to get at this thing, trying to figure out where we're at. Which is why when I've gone back and forth with folks on Twitter, I tell them, look, it's okay if we disagree. The most beautiful thing about all this is that you and I want the same thing. What it means to be seen as people owed respect.
Yeah.
You just may locate that line differently in this movie.
Right.
But the beautiful thing is the movie is unifying us around the idea that we want and demand respect. And hey, that's a beautiful thing too.
Absolutely. Chris-Lebron, hey, thanks so much for hanging out with me this morning. It's a priceless conversation, and I know it's going to benefit a lot of people. Could you tell everyone the best way that you want to be contacted, whether it be Twitter or otherwise?
Yeah, so you get at me at @Lebron_Chris. on Twitter, and there I be. But Benjamin, thanks for having me on. This has been such a intellectually and spiritually uplifting conversation. And again, we should thank the movie for bringing folks like me and you together.
Absolutely.
To give a conversation like this to the people.
Yeah.
And then see what people say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this has been cathartic for me. This is I can actually go out and deal with some colonizers now. So thanks for getting my day started right, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot, Benjamin. I appreciate
take care.
that.
All right. God bless. That's it for part 1 of today's episode. I'll be uploading part 2 later today. And the third part, I think I'm going to do something for the patrons because I haven't done anything for you all lately. So part 3, the conversation on CNN and the anti-Trump movement and my friendly spat yesterday with the fellas from The Intercept. I'm going to upload that as a patrons only podcast. Go to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron to get access to that bonus material. Thanks so much to Chris. A wonderful conversation. Keep the conversations going on because I think just even having this discussion actually benefits the Black community. And if you benefit the Black community, you benefit every community. At least historically, that's been the case. Take care, everyone. See you later today. And then for the rest of you, I'll see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.